Alli, we are back. Disrupt education, unpacking, repacking, and repacking and then unpacking. What does that even
Mm,
mean? We came up with that and we were thinking, okay, wait, it has to do with you jumping out of airplanes.
it does have to do. So, for those of you who have been part of this journey, thank you. I went through the process of getting my skydiving license. I now have my skydiving license, which is it feels like this crazy feat that I did. But okay, when you actually go to skydive, right, the skydiving part is this tiny little experience of like 60 seconds, and then you have a little canopy fall, but the part that you want is the 60 seconds of free fall. And then you get to the ground and your parachute is open and you carry it in, and you spend actually like 10 times more time packing that parachute. So when you get into the sport of skydiving, you're actually getting into the sport of packing. And so the same thing with education. I think this is where we were thinking about this is that when you go through a learning experience, the the actual packing part or the you repack in order to kind of like go through it again. So you're packing to unpack, really. But what is the important piece there is the packing portion, is the reflective portion in the learner's journey. So for me, with my own little skydiving journey, I've just come to realize like how important the repacking is. And like at first you're like, oh, this isn't exciting because it's not like, ooh, the jumping out of the plane part, but it's actually where you like debrief and you like talk through like the pros, the cons, like what went right, what went wrong, and you like learn so much more during that time than you do in the 60 seconds of action.
I just went through a pitch project with my entrepreneurship students, and we did that. We packed it. They did their speech, so I'll just say they pulled the ripcord, and it was terrifying. But the repack was interesting because I had them go back. I filmed it for them on their own phones because I wanted them to be safe. And they were like, I don't want to show this to anybody. And they were horrified to actually even watch themselves. So I remember you talking a little bit about when you were not even trusting yourself and you had those moments of doubt when you were packing your own parachute, right? And I remember I think you even said it. I don't know if it was in one of our pre-production meetings or whatnot, or maybe even on one of the podcasts, but it was a scary moment. But as you go through it, I don't think we do that in education as much. I think it's just, all right, we're jump, boom, let's go, keep going, keep going, keep going. And I think that repack is, and we're going to go back at it tomorrow in class, but I really want to, I keep saying pack, but unpack it for the students and let them know, look, yeah, absolutely. You should embrace, and I say it all the time, embrace the suck, right? Like embrace that you are terrible or at something and it's okay. Like that's learning. You just created a starting point. So that was an interesting project that I will definitely update our listeners on as well. That's the unpack repack. We also had three amazing guests over the last 3 weeks, Britta, Andy, and Joel. So unpack that.
Right, like that's the unpacking of these awesome conversations that we're having on this series of going beyond the score and just like getting these really rich experiences, right? So those were like the action moments, jumping out of the plane, pulling the ripcord, getting those. And so now we're doing a little mid-series intermission, but like it's the most important part. You got to stretch your legs, you got to pull it apart, you got to like reflect and I don't know. There's value to doing this work, and it's not just here on our podcast, right? It's like in the educational space. Like, and even before we go into like the guests a little bit, I was on a coaching call today. Okay, and one of the practices that I do in this particular space is like we read a prompt, and then we everybody on the call is like they have to quietly like write and reflect on it before they share anything. And I absolutely guarantee, and you can as an educator also validate this, is that the discussion is richer when we take that pause, rather than just like word vomiting the first things that come to our mind. And so it's the same thing with this series. It's like we're getting these ideas from people, but if we just kind of left the conversation there, I feel like we'd be missing out on the repacking of these conversations and trying to look at like, what are we finding? What are we seeing in this series? And then like, where does it need to go moving forward? So all of that to say, if I am thinking about Britta, Andy, and Joel, which amazing conversations, right? One of the threads that I feel like all of them kind of hit on in different ways is that we need more skills. And like the outdated models that we're currently using, they aren't working. What would you say? Well, like what's something that you're like, in this moment that we're kind of like unpacking this, that's kind of coming to your mind?
I know, like for me, there's a lot of frustration, right? I mean, there's a lot of frustration because as I go through the entire, another year and things like that, and we see like these things. I think things move slowly, and putting all three of these people together, it's very interesting because there's movement over here. There's a whole, and I'm going to say with Joel, right? Like they're moving and they're creating some policies and attaching skills in academia and really kind of understanding it. I don't feel that movement quite yet as a high school educator, so that's frustrating. However, then you have Andy, who really talked about there really isn't a teacher shortage. There is there are teachers everywhere, and that's like, you're right. And then we have Britta, who was kind of really thrown into an amazing adventure, I will say, in Italy, and then ended up just going her own way. And I know she's an amazing educator, and now she's educating people on LinkedIn. So I'm just like, where does this fit into a grand system? And I think you asked that question a lot across all three of these great guests. Was where can we help the most people the fastest? And for me, I think that's what the frustration is. So that's kind of how they run together for me. They're amazing outliers still. I don't want outliers anymore, but maybe that's just my patience.
Just your patience. Okay, so with all three of the guests, the other kind of thread there, and you kind of said it without saying it, was this idea that kind of like took education into their own hands. And like, man, I loved Andy's story of his dad,
Right.
like, just going into the community college and being like, basically did a sales pitch, but like convincing the colleges. So it's like, for me, and like even like Britta, when she was navigating the like international system, I feel like she was like kind of pitching herself. And then Joel, like, he is literally pitching to colleges and institutions to like do things differently. And so it really kind of makes me wonder, like, is sales, right? Like, and like effective communication, and like sales has kind of like a different connotation. It's not something that really gets used in schools, but is that a framework that we need to kind of lean into more as educators and as those in the educational space of like, look, if it is frustrating, like, what can we pitch as a solution to just like get started?
Yeah.
Right? And like disrupt it ourselves and kind of take this movement of like, scores don't matter. We need richness in the conversations. We need more than a number on a piece of paper. We need tactile things in order to kind of move the needle beyond the score. And I'll kind of sum it up with this. One of my colleagues, so this is where like you have the microcosm of educators, so like yourself, doing their own thing. So one of my friends teaches AP Physics 1 and 2, and in his AP2 class, he is trying out a gradeless portfolio-based system. Do you feel like more, like when I think about all of the things we've talked about on this series, I keep coming back to this model because I just love the storytelling aspect. And Andy hit on that so much, is like, what is the story you're telling about your learning, right? Like all of them had this, they were kind of saying that without saying it. piece. And I just keep hearing it more and more. So like you do more work with portfolio pieces. So like when you think about that, what comes to mind is like pros and like the some kind of missing elements there that we just haven't been seeing with the traditional grade report, college essay,
Yeah.
ACT score practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because everybody wants data, but everybody wants data to get away from data. I mean, right? So yeah, that I do hear that a lot, and actually, there is a great group of people out there. It's called Teachers Going Gradeless, and it's an amazing. Arthur Chevali is a great dude, so look him up. I'll put a link in this one, in this episode. But there is a lot, and there is like you said there, an AP course going gradeless or testing it is amazing. Because that to me, now you're calming my impatience down, right? But I will tell you, like this year, I opened up the entire year with my students, and I learned this from my students last year to help them understand and explain that the number doesn't always matter, right? I mean, yeah, you can measure something and improve it and do those things. That's great, but it's that unpack and repack, right? And then how does that, you know, what does that look like for you as a learner, right? So yes, I'm deep into portfolios. We use Spikeview. It's an amazing, the student centered piece, and I become an accountability partner. I become a coach, a mentor. I hardly use the word teacher to students because that's so traditional. And this year, I got to tell you, Alli, like I've had 3 students already tell me, I'm not bragging here, but it's humbling that you're my favorite teacher. And I want to know why. I'm 4 days in. And, and here's a cheap shot because I got to throw a cheap shot here, but I'm sufficient on my teacher observations. Just want to let you know that. But that's a cheap shot. That's a political thing. But anyway, had to throw it out there because that's just me. I disrupt education. But yeah, you're right. You're right. How do we get these students to tell their stories, their journeys, and then make education more equitable? And I think each one of these guests were really talking about how they were doing that and or attempting to do that. The frustrations behind it. So yeah, it's interesting that. And obviously through this entire series, the students who get the grade, the number, I mean, the test score, I mean, I wrote a blog, my test score, my SAT score was awful. Did it hinder me somewhat? Yeah, it did. Should it have? I don't think so. But maybe there was no other way. And again, I'm not giving an excuse here. I really didn't try, and I was kind of a little bit more attitudey than I am now. But yeah, but questioning these things and trying these new things, I think that's amazing. I'm very excited to hear how this AP Physics course goes without
I am too. We might have to get him on the podcast actually. Now, while we're recording this one, just Joe, just so you know, might be reaching out.
We'll give a shout out.
And okay, so something that you heard that I don't remember what article I heard this in. And so like, I feel like a buzzword, buzz phrase right now in education for educators is right. Like, don't be, like the stand at the front, like lecturer, be, like that guide, that, facilitator. But I just read this article about how teachers should be in the messy middle. They should be like learning it with the students, which, okay, if we're talking about facing fears, like, right, I don't know that I would have embraced this before I just did this whole skydiving adventure. But like in my own kind of practice and thinking about education and kind of this repacking idea, right? So it's like this open-mindedness to expand what education is. It is being okay with the classroom being messy. Now, I want to preface this with, so in addition to all these amazing guests that we've had and everything, my grandpa is a big fan. He's a big fan of the series and the podcast, and he's 92. Okay. So he watches it on YouTube, and he was listening to our series, and he printed me off some articles. So those of you who are on YouTube can see, like,
Love it.
he printed these off for me. And one, like, and he like highlighted in neat little notes. It's so cute. But it really goes into this conversation that we're having right now, which is about educational leadership and the role of the teacher. And I think for you, Peter, and other educators who are listening to this, or and it doesn't matter if you're a teacher or like whatever your role is in the educational space, like if you're feeling this frustration, okay, this article goes into a school and how the educational leaders are like the ones who set the tone. And I know we mentioned on one of the episodes, I think it was with Andy, where like the mission of the school is there, but then like, are we actually doing anything with it? Right? So this school here in the article, it says their goal is to form critical thinkers. And that needs to dictate the teaching methods used in the classroom. So what was interesting is they talk about the Socratic method. And basically, you know, we're talking about ways to disrupt education. So we can't look at like these test scores and these ACT scores and letter grades as the means for richness in developing these critical thinking skills and open-mindedness and being reflective in all of this. And so the article goes on to say that the Socratic method is this formal discussion. It's based on a text in which the leader asks open-ended questions, okay? And then within the context of the discussion, students listen closely to the comments of others, think critically for themselves, and articulate their own thoughts and their responses to the thoughts of others. They learn to work cooperatively, to question intelligently and civilly. That can't happen if you are the sage on the stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, like, here's the information. There's going to be a test on it on Friday.
Yeah. And shout out to Grandpa. That's awesome. I love that. 92 years young. I hope I get there. Man, there's so much to unpack there. I think, you know, one of the things that I have to do, and now I'm a high school, I'm a secondary educator, and this is no like blame to primary education or anything like that, but this is just a system that we live in, that we learn to be quiet and listen to a teacher somewhere in the way that becomes the norm. For the most part, I'm not saying like, you know, there are great educators out there across the board. I spend a lot of my time, Alli, trying, when that article said listening to others and bouncing ideas off of them and communicating, by the time students get to me, I have to reteach that. I have to kind of negotiate that. And that actually takes time. As a matter of fact, that's what we're doing in our entrepreneurship classes. That's what we're doing in our career planning classes and our career internship classes. Is we're trying, what I'm working with the students to do is get them uncomfortable in front of each other, by doing speeches and different things like that and unpacking them. And then, that starts to pull down those walls again. For some reason, maybe I need to do more research on this, but the students they want to do the easy thing, right? They want to just I just want to answer the question, check the box, and move on. To that point, even about 6 or 7 years ago, now this is a little bit, longer time ago, when I started portfolios and I started working with students, I had a student holler at me, kind of mean. So you have no right to know about me. You just teach computer applications. This is a different school than I'm at now. And I was taken aback. I was like, wow. But then you have to realize, maybe there's some things, social emotional challenges this young man had or anything like that. But it was such a defiant, no, I want to check the box. It is since, I think, the pandemic has kind of pulled down some of that as well in I don't know where I'm going with this, but I mean, I think basically we have to reteach it. And I don't know why. I think there's opportunity missed there to continually do that in some sort of curriculum space or whatever, where the teacher is in the middle of this whole thing, and not up front.
Don't you think educators and those educational leaders and the system needs to be like, they need to be retaught, right? Like
Yeah.
the unpack doesn't just come from like these students, which is a huge piece of it, right? Like we have to unpack it to our students, but like as an educator, okay, Peter, at what point in your educational career did you feel okay being messy with your planning and like, shifting stuff from day to day because it was like what the students need? Because I will tell you, I was way more robotic in my teaching my first couple of years.
Yeah.
And then it kind of like grew, but I also was modeling my own teaching practices after what I had seen and what I'd experienced and what worked for me, right? Like I didn't become more open-minded to kind of figuring out like what works best for not just me but my students until a few years in, but then it was still within the box of what my school leaders said it was okay, right? So like how do we disrupt that and allow for more richness, like with portfolios, like with what you're talking about of this deconstruction? Not all classes have that time, right? Because we have end of year exams. We have to get through all of this material. We have these standards to hit. And it's like, well, sure, like I'd love to be creative and develop all these things, but you also have enough stuff for me to fill 200 days, and I only have 100 and
Right.
however many with the kids.
Yeah. That's funny you said that, because we, in our school, we just brought on over the last 2 years, two amazing math teachers into the business. And I overheard one of them telling the other one, because he taught math 2 years ago and he came to business last year, and then the new one came over, and he's like, you got to get out of your math process and slow down. And I was like, that's exactly what you just said in a different way. And they know this. So, yeah, I mean, how critical is it? There's a lot of different angles we can go, but how critical is it to cover all that curriculum? Well, I think if you're new, and you feel the pressure, and I'm going to go back to observations, in the way that they're methodically incorrect, in my opinion, except for, and I'm going to give a shout out to Craig Randall, who does trust-based observations. It was a very simple, hey, Alli, what did you do? All right, let's chat about it. It's not that simple, but it is almost that simple. And if anybody's out there, you should check that book out, Trust-Based Observations. I think that comes into play as well. When did I not start caring about all that stuff? That's a great question. I mean, man, I'm old, so I have to, not grandpa old. Shout out to you, grandpa. You're still sharp. I need to like kind of mirror some of the things he did in his 50s. But I will tell you this. I think it was when the pain of seeing students walk out of our building with absolutely no idea who they were, what their skills were outside of a number. And how did I learn that? Well, I think it was with the evolution of Facebook, to be honest. When I started following students, we started friending as they went into college. I know a lot of people were like, I remember the days when people were like, don't connect with your kids on social media. And look, I know there were some creepos out there, but trust me, that wasn't me. It was just like, I want to see where you're going. Tell me how this is. It's interesting now because I'm old enough. I have students on Facebook, Instagram. I haven't quite got to TikTok yet, but I mean, I'm on TikTok. But like, you see and you learn from the students. And so many of my Facebook students are now well into their 20s, some into their 30s. And they had it tough. I mean, you're talking about the millennial generation coming out. And I saw that happen. Yeah, right? And that, frankly, that pissed me off. And so then I was like, I got to change something. I would say the combination of not being afraid of losing my job, but that'll hold you just long enough. That's, and then really doing what's right. But again, I bring a different lens. You're in a science classroom. I'm in a business classroom. So I feel like I have a little bit more flexibility as a quote unquote elective.
So it's interesting because uh, my first, I would say definitely 2 years, and probably it was really into my third, where I was just doing what had been modeled to me, what I saw work and what was effective, like not only, in my own educational experience, but then in like my student teaching experience, which was really great. And just full on getting to really dig into like why my cooperating teacher was doing the practices that she was, and I liked them. But then I think what happened for me is I was like, this isn't me.
Hmm.
Like I had this realization where I was like, where is me a part of this room? And like, I didn't feel like, I felt like this tug between like who I was presenting as teacher Alli and then like who I wanted to be. And there was this chasm, and I didn't like feeling like I was putting on a face or, like a tone
Yeah.
for my students. So I think it kind of started it. But then what I think really, really started uh, hitting me is, I would say probably my fourth and fifth year, I started doing more reflection pieces in the lab work, and even more open-ended questions than I had been doing. And the students were so tough on themselves. And I remember being like blown away at like how hard they were on themselves about the scores, about the grades.
Yeah.
And that when that dialogue started happening, I started realizing that I didn't want to be a part of it. Like I didn't want to add to their stress. And so I literally started saying, and tests in my classroom became a data point, and it's feedback to move you forward. And I said, the score is meaningless. In the grand scheme of your life, it means absolutely nothing other than it's a data point in a series of thousands of data points that gives you feedback on where you were in that moment of time, but it's not predictive of who you are or where you're going or what you can do.
Yeah.
And I started using that verbiage over and over and over again. And that's when I, one, started feeling like alignment with, what I felt like I was contributing my part to the dialogue. But then I also felt like super empowering for the kids, because it wasn't like I held them, or I was valuing or devaluing or like liking them or disliking them because of a number on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
But yet they have been in this system that values positive, negative thoughts based on scores.
Yeah.
And it's crippling. And so, yeah, right? Like, so when I feel frustrated with the educational system, it's one, like a little bit of being, like the confines, like the lack of like, it's like there's too much structure,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
We need to get rid of some of it.
Yeah.
Um, and then it is like really empowering teachers to be this. I know where I found the messy middle. It's from this article, the other article from my grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
It's the meddler in the middle, and it's this collaborative co-learner in the thick of the action. Right? Like I want more of that, and I would try and do more and more of that every single year. Of course, there's only so much time, and like you have to strategize. But it's like, if leadership, if the teachers are empowered, and then they're allowed to kind of like, I mean, I spent a lot of my reflective time trying to craft this experience, but not everyone does that, or without like help or aid. And so it's like, we need to have more time for teachers to kind of unpack their own, I don't want to call it like teacher trauma, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like these things that they think have to be part of the system, or educational leaders having space to kind of like unpack like the experiences and be like, do we really need this? Is this actually helpful for kids? Is this actually what we need to be doing? Or do we need to like shift stuff? Do we need to like throw out this curriculum? And then even at like the policy level, how can we empower students, teachers, leaders, everybody in the space to be able to shift faster,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to be able to make those changes to get kids to, have more agency, be more involved. I think all of those components are really, really need to be part of the narrative
Mm-hmm.
moving forward.
and I feel it's going to be interesting to watch because some states have actually implemented, some areas of the country have implemented like the 4-day, schedule. Well, let's look at it on both sides here, right? As an educator, right now in the afternoons, I teach 3 classes in a row. It's basically 2 hours and 40 minutes, really nonstop. They can call like the passing period, but whatever. And I'm moving around and stuff. So think about like the real work world, right? That really doesn't exist unless maybe you're a professional athlete. I don't know. Like maybe there's a few out there, and listeners, call me out on this and comment if I'm off. And then also, but then think about the students, right? We've always said, and I think Sir Ken Robinson has said this, I've read a lot of other books around this. If business was run like a school, it would close down in 6 months, right? Like no one can take and learn as much as we pack in a day in a traditional system, I should say, to where you're a student and you're going bam, 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 all the way through. Like, the Iowa Big Project actually grew out of them grabbing on to school board members and say, you need to go through a week of school like our students. They were exhausted after 2 days. And I'm like, this is what we're doing to our students and our staff. And again, we get back to the question is why? How can we do this differently? So guess who we have coming up after this Unpack to Repack? We got some student voice coming up. So yeah.
Oh, yes, we do. And we need to hear from the students because they're in it right now. Yeah. And so me and you have perspective. Everybody thinks they're an expert on education because everybody has had their own experience. And I get that. Like, you do have your experience. We need to validate that experience. Absolutely. But, like, what is better than somebody in the experience right now?
Yeah.
Like, richer. So pulling from these we've got some innovative, top-notch students coming on the series. And it's going to be really awesome to hear their perspective on what they think about education and how they think it should be disrupted and what they think about grades and college. Man, they got some interesting thoughts.
And I think, we really need to listen more. And I like the fact that you brought up that, everybody has their experience, and that experience should be validated. And I think that's the movement of where we're missing opportunities, is to actually let people show the skills and who they are in that experience. And I think that's just why people are so angry, because people don't have that opportunity all the time in education to do that. But I think the people we have coming up, these young, these amazing people, are going to kind of share how they figured that out, and how to kind of connect who they are with their interest, with what they're learning. And yeah, are they going to have to check the box every once in a while? Yeah, they will, but they have found this interesting path, and it's paths, I should say, plural. So I'm excited about what's coming up in the next part of the podcast series. Any closing thoughts, Alli?
Conversation. Wow. Oh my gosh. We're going to need like a lot of time to repack it. We're going to do a repack on this pack job, because I feel like we're still only getting so, we're just like layering more into this conversation. And what I would also add as a closing thought, so we love it here on this Disrupt Education podcast. Like, my grandpa listening to this and sharing these articles was like, whoa, it's so awesome. But we want more of you to be part of this conversation, right? So it's like, please send us your thoughts, questions, concerns. I mean, what do you have to add to the conversation? Because this is needed. We want to validate your experience and like the perspectives that you bring. Like, what are we missing? Because we're really trying to find ways to connect academia to reality, get out of our silos, and go beyond the score.
Excellent. Excellent. Reach out. All our connection information is in the notes of the podcast. We would love to hear from you. Thank you, Alli. I can't wait till these next couple of guests come along. And thank you all for listening. We'll catch you next time on the Disrupt Education Podcast.